Welcome to B2B Sales Trends, the podcast dedicated to sales leaders in the B2B space, where we share conversations about innovative and successful sales transformations to keep you up to date on the latest trends. This podcast is brought to you by Global Performance Group.
Welcome yet to another fabulous episode of the B2B Sales Trends podcast, the show that brings you hacks, tips, thought leadership for sales, marketing, and customer success, my lovely people. It is brought to you by us. Who is us? We are Global Performance Group, a revenue improvement boutique that implements sales capability transformation within sales and salespeople to give them the confidence, the competence, and courage to engage differently with their clients. We solve three problems for our customers, which is we're going to increase their win rates, we're going to reduce their sales cycle, and we're going to protect their margins. My name is Harry Kendlbacher, and today I have with me Mark Grimwood. Mark is the Senior Vice President at Salesforce, responsible for, and it's a bit of a mouthful, so I have to read it off my chart, global sales and distribution, recruitment, and global talent attraction. Welcome to the B2B Sales Trends podcast, Mark.
Excellent. Thanks for having me, Harry. You nailed the title. I know it's a lot, but I appreciate you having me on the show here.
That's great. Great. Thank you for making time, Mark. It's a pleasure to have you on today. As a sort of to kick us off, give us a bit of an intro about you, yourself, your role. That will be fab.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, I actually started my career out of school in sales. So I did a little bit on the sales front there as well. And then after doing that for about a year, I made the switch into recruiting for sales roles. And that was at a previous company prior to Salesforce. But that's sort of how I got into the sales recruiting sphere. And then it's going to be 15 years as of this month that I've been at Salesforce now. And I came over here as a recruiter, started recruiting for sales roles in our sales development function, as well as some of our solution engineering and some of our customer success roles. And I was an individual contributor for about two and a half years before I made my first jump into management. And then just started managing larger teams of recruiters supporting our sales organization. And I did that for about the first 9 years, was all on the sales recruiting side, sales recruiting management side. Then I made the switch and took on our global customer success group, which was a big transition for me, right? Because I had grown up in sales. I knew the sales organization well. Our CSG org was sort of unfamiliar to me, but it was a chance to grow and expand my skill set. So I jumped at that. And it was transformative for me because it opened up my eyes to how we support our customers beyond the sale, right? The professional services side of our business, the customer support, customer success side of our business, really rounded out that view of how we ensure customer success within our customer base. So did that for about two and a half years. And then we brought it all together. So the sales and that customer success group at a global scale. So been doing that for about three and a half years now as well. And it's been a rapidly changing environment. When I started here, we were 4,500 employees as an organization at Salesforce. We're sitting in and around 75,000-ish right now as an organization. So during 15 years, it's been a lot of growth. Not always sort of linear. You have those ups and downs as you go through it, but sort of always up and to the right, which is where we want to be. But it's been an exciting journey for sure.
Fabulous. Let's talk a little bit about that journey and that expertise. Obviously, a number of years at Salesforce, tremendous growth on all fronts. And obviously, this being the B2B Sales Trends podcast, and you've been in touch with a variety of different roles and responsibilities within the sales function. Can you share a little bit about how your experience that has shaped that over the years and your perspective on how do you build a successful and effective sales team?
Yeah, and it's like you said, it has been a journey, right? And you look at where Salesforce has come during that time as an organization, where 15 years ago we're predominantly CRM more focused probably on the small, medium-sized business. We're really just getting into the enterprise at that standpoint, to now where we have a large enterprise focus and sort of support customers of all sizes. It's been a really interesting journey to see how the sales process has evolved, and therefore it sort of lands on our team to go find as the profile of seller has changed along the way. But that complexity of sale over the last 15 years, has continued to evolve as you go through sort of social economic factors in the marketplace. We've gone through a pandemic. Now we're in the age of AI. And each of those sort of macro events that are happening in the world change how we sell and how we support our customers and how our customers buy from us. You know what I mean? And so that has been a really interesting journey to see how that has evolved, how that's progressed. And from my standpoint, where that sits is that the skills and competencies that are needed as a seller to really help our customer base solve their problems. How do we sort of understand their nuances and their challenges? That changes as all those macroeconomic changes happen, or those big changes in the world happen. So we need to find sellers. That profile has changed and evolved along the way as well. It's been a very interesting journey for sure.
Right. I couldn't agree more. The complexity of sales has evolved through all those different events that you have shared. One of the things that we do at our organization, we make sure that people have the conversation that create outcomes for their clients. They have to generate new needs, not just find out existing needs, but generate new thinking in the mind of their clients. They have to facilitate a conversation that's based on customer outcomes versus basically pushing a box or pushing a product. Is that what you see too, your experience?
Yeah, and I think it more than ever, right? I think the pandemic had a profound shift on how customers buy, right? Where I think before that, things were running smooth. People had a little bit more looser with budgets. Post-pandemic, a lot of that came to a halt, right? And I think that we've seen both the CFO and the CIO take a more prominent role in deals, regardless of industry or segment. Like I just feel like those two roles had really elevated. It's a lot more value based out of every purchase, right? I think there's a lot more scrutiny on how all of our customers are spending each dollar. And what is that return on investment? Obviously, that ROI has always been important, but it's even like to get that dollar spent, there needs to be that additional inspection up front. And for us, in our team of sellers, being able to articulate that and tell that story, right? To share the vision, but then also all the milestones along the way of like, what does success look like? What does ROI, not just the grand scheme ROI, but those incremental returns that you're going to see along the way, because that CIO, that CFO, the CEOs, they're going to be accountable to each step along the way. The story is important, that broad vision is important, but you need more milestones along the way to show that success with every purchase you're making.
And it's how do you demonstrate these outcomes? It's interesting you described that shift. Now, in our world, that means that there is behavior change within the sales organization is required, necessarily, right? So people gravitate to the conversation, to the personas that they like to have that conversation. They not necessarily want to engage with roles that they're not comfortable with. Are you seeing similar things here, that there is that behavior change? And behavior change is difficult, right? Change is
definitely
difficult, right?
Yeah, and I think the focus and the demands on sales leaders and sales individuals to be lifelong learners is at a greater rate than we've ever seen. Because it's not just hey, I'm a salesperson, I can sell anything. That mantra, I think, is a little outdated. I think that it doesn't give enough credit to the strong salespeople To be a strong sales individual, you can't just go sell anything. Like some people can, some people just have that gift. But the majority, it's like you need to know your industry. You need to know what is going on with your customers. That level of detail and understanding about your product suite and ROI and benefits, that's one piece. But how that actually can impact your customers and what are they facing? What challenges do they have as an entire organization? And where does your product fit in? That knowledge level has just increased tremendously. So we're seeing that skill set around being that lifetime learner and always sort of developing more skills and rounding out your skill set is becoming more and more important to drive success.
We had a pre-call to this recording, and I've noted something down that I want to share with the audience, that there has been a shift at Salesforce from this growth at all cost. You title it pre-pandemic, to a more thoughtful approach post-pandemic. How has this changed, Salesforce's strategy for building sales teams, and sort of, what lessons can others take from that transition?
Yeah, definitely. And I think we're seeing it not just at Salesforce. I think it's across all of technology, and it's a much more similar conversation to what we were just thinking about how our customers buy. It's how we grow an organization has changed post-pandemic as well. Whereas before it was build, growth.
Right.
That growth is still very much important, right?
Yep.
So how we do it, I think, is just being inspected even further, right? And I think things like quality of hire and return on investment of people that you bring into the organization is being looked at an even greater scale. And it should be, right? That investment in people is, you look at an organization and how much they spend on their people. It's the largest investment an organization is in their people. And
Right.
yet some organizations, the measurement of what does success look like? How are we onboarding people? How are we training people? How are we ensuring that success? That part hasn't necessarily caught up, right? And then you tie it into, and are we bringing the right people in that can then be set up for success in all those later stages of onboarding, enablement, and the rest of their employee life cycle? So I would say that there's just been that increased shift to the ROI on the people that we're bringing in. I think everyone knows that making a bad hire can be costly and can be time consuming and takes up a lot of effort. So I think that has always been clear, but I think it's also that benefit of doing it right and what that ROI can look like. I think that is getting a new lens. There's more data around quality of hire. You're seeing more technologies that are out there that can help tie in skills to output metrics, and you can actually get like tangible data and quantifiable data around what a quality hire looks like. And everyone might have a different definition of that, and I think that that's fine, but it is a matter of going through that process of defining what does success look like, and then building, again, milestones along that journey to really understand, is this individual, is this new hire on track to be successful? If not, how can we up-level them and set them up for success and course correct?
And how do you do this strategically, right? And at scale?
Totally.
I mean, that's a huge challenge. And how do you balance sort of hiring for those current skill needs, should I say, that you have described, with the sort of potential for growth and adaptability? What sort of roles does diversity of thought, for example, and skills
100%.
play in creating that sort of super well-rounded sales team?
Yeah, I think, and you nailed it. I think that there's a huge advantage, and there's a lot of statistics that just show that more diverse teams do better, right? And like you said, whether that's gender diversity, racial diversity,
Right.
Diversity of thought, economic status diversity, what you need a well-rounded team. And the reason for that is because you're selling into customers that are diverse, that are going to have different needs. The individuals that you're working with, the challenges that they're having, how they're servicing their customer base is going to be very unique depending on your industries and depending on the size of customers. And if you only have one way of approaching that challenge or one mindset, you're not going to grow, right? And I think every business is, like we said, every dollar is being watched even further. You want to see that greater return on every dollar spent. So you really need to maximize those engagements that you have with your customers. And if you only go with one cookie cutter approach, we only hire people from this school, or they have to have X amount of years doing this exact thing before coming into the organization,
Right.
you're going to miss out on a lot, right? Now, you can't open up too much, because if you cast too wide of a net, you don't have enough guardrails. That makes it very difficult as well to try and narrow it down for hiring managers to understand what that looks like. So that's where the relationship between recruiting, sales strategy, sales leaders, around defining what that measure of success looks like, what that profile of success looks like, and then digging into it, right? It's not a set it and forget it. You have to constantly be looking at, how is our sales process changing? How is our product suite changing? And then does that change what we need out of the people that are selling it? Probably. And what does that look like, right? And so it's an ongoing discussion. And that's, I think, a new piece as well, where I think a lot of times sales leaders partner with recruiting. And it's like, all right, here's what we need. All right, we got the person. We'll talk to you when we need the next person. But it's that ongoing partnership that allows you to be strategic, like you were mentioning before.
And, we see very much the fact that buying behavior keeps changing too. So a challenge that we see a lot is that, yes, these sales organizations trying to adapt, but trying to adapt basically on what they think they should be adapting to. The buyer side is doing it, in a different way. So how do you merge these two, right? There's this stat, don't quote me exactly on the percentage, but it's something like 70-ish% of the buying decision has been made before a salesperson is even engaged. So if you crop up with the same old rubbish questions that everybody else is asking, you're not going to help the buyer make a decision. So how do you deal effectively with these well-trained, well-informed, well down the decision-making path buyers, and how do salespeople really adapt to that while protecting what they need to achieve, right?
Right. Well, and I think that this is, I'm going to dive into the AI conversation based off of this one, because I think that AI is such a valuable and powerful tool that we're still figuring out in a lot of ways how to efficiently use it and maximize it. But this is where the human part of it comes in, right? Of asking questions and building relationships and understanding challenges that AI can't do that part of it. AI can give you a lot of background. It can consolidate information. It can make recommendations. There's a lot of brilliant use cases for it. But getting on the phone with a CIO or a CEO or a CFO and understanding their day-to-day pains and like what's actually going on in their business, and then making that connection on how you can support them or not, right? Both are extremely important as salespeople. That part's not getting automated, right? But it's those individuals that are really asking great questions, that are curious, that are digging in to understand their customers, that are going to be able to really utilize that AI to automate some of the other work so that they can spend more of that human time together. And that's what's, I think, going to be the future of this, of sellers in that space.
I've been doing this for a very long time. I've been in the sales learning industry for 25-ish years now. And obviously there has been a lot of change. Some things came, stayed, some left, and so forth. And when AI first appeared a few years ago, this whole sort of, are we going to need salespeople? Is this going to replace the human element of that? Well, my take is it will replace a certain aspect in the sales process, typically sort of the early funnel filling sort of activities. But really what it requires is that upskill, right? That upskill to be elite. Exactly that element that AI can't deliver, just like you have described. It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's gonna the next 3 years, 3 to 5 years are going to be really transformative, I think, on how salespeople sell and the relationship between sellers and buyers. I think is going to be tremendously enhanced by AI. But at the core of it is those individuals that can show curiosity, that can ask good questions, that have a well-rounded knowledge of their product offering, their customers, business, and then having AI is going to surround all of that to enable a lot of that. But that understanding still comes down to the human.
And links really nicely in what you've mentioned earlier, and I want to dig a little bit more into that term lifelong learning in sales that you have mentioned. It requires that lifelong learning for people to keep up with those fast, rapid changes. How can organizations, in your opinion, sort of foster a culture of ongoing, continuous, never-ending improvement to ensure that their salespeople are up to scratch? What's your take on that?
Yeah, definitely. I do think that there is an imperative on organizations to provide opportunities, right? Because everyone learns in different ways. So there isn't one path to say, oh, you need to do this, because we're all different learning styles. There are lots of research around that as well. Right. So I think from an organizational standpoint, really understanding, okay, you have an onboarding program, you have enablement programs, what tools are you providing your team to facilitate that ongoing learning? Like, do you have it built into your benefits where they can go externally and purchase educational programs and enroll in more structured education? Great. Do you have an internal learning management system, that allows them for self-learning and self-paced learning through a virtual tool? Great. Then a lot of it also falls on the individual, right? We live in a digital age, right, where there is more access to information through podcasts, still, old school books, paper books, reading. They still exist. There's lots of great ones. Audible books, if you're more, that's what I do. I'm walking the dog. I have an Audible book on the go, and that's how I knock it out. Everyone's going to need their own space and time to carve out to learn. And it's like, where can you provide those different pathways for the different types of learning? I think that companies that do that well are setting their sales organizations up for success, because the more well-rounded their teams are to be able to go into these organizations and have thoughtful, meaningful discussions rather than just, hey, I want to sell you my product, right? That's what is going to be required. And there's tremendous opportunities out there, and there's a million different tools. What is your strategy? Like, get very intentional about what you're going to offer people as an organization. And then for the individuals, how do you take advantage of what your company is offering and do your own thing, right? It falls on both sides for sure.
Right. I like the idea of having a well-rounded approach. In our industry, there's a lot of content out there. As you said, you can watch a video, you can read a book, and you can,
sure.
But it doesn't mean you can actually do it. You acquire the knowledge intellectually. Doesn't mean you can do it in front of the customer when there is tension, when they put you under pressure, and so forth. So it really has to be a well-rounded approach that provides them the knowledge, but also gives them an opportunity to, execute and practice these things before they go out. I like that. Great.
And I think, just to give you an example, so one of the books that we actually took from the sales organization that we're using within our recruiting team, it's called The Jolt Effect. And it's a sales-based book, great book, lots of great insights in there. It's one thing to say, hey, go read this and implement it. Taking that next step. So one of the things that we do is we actually have our team share video, sort of like testimonials with the rest of their team around wins that they've had using that technique. Correct. Right? So everyone has read and absorbed it, to your point, but then it's like, all right, now show it in action and share with other people around you, right? Like, building that community piece and getting feedback from peers, not just your manager, but peers around you about how you're implementing it. Again, that learning we've actually seen has really driven some great success, which is why there has been, return to office is obviously a hot button topic coming post-pandemic as well. But that's part of the value of it, is being around other people and learning and hearing what they're doing and sharing those stories. You can use technology as well, right? You can do it through video, you can do it through in person. So there's not, again, just one way of doing it, but having that community feel, and to your point, how are you actually utilizing some of that information you've absorbed as a learner, I think is super valuable.
Right. Now, Salesforce has scaled scarily dramatically fast, if I may say that, during the time you've been there. What are some of sort of the biggest lessons you've learned about growing teams strategically while maintaining alignment with marketing client demands? What are some sort of the key things that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, I think this is a biased take, being on the recruiting side of it, of course.
Good,
but
right.
I think one of the biggest pieces is you need to be intentional about it.
Yeah.
About who you're bringing into your organization, the skill sets that you require to be successful. And you need to be digging into that, right? And don't just accept it at face value that, hey, we've hired someone that's had this experience before. Let's go hire more of those people. And I get why that has historically been the case, right? Sales managers have a lot on their plate, right? They're managing a team, they're involved in deals, they're being asked to, hit numbers and show growth. They have a lot of different pieces. So that hiring piece sometimes is like, well, I'm taking the easier path because I have so much, I need to find a way to get all my work done. And I understand that, but the investment that you have in people is going to pay off more than any other thing, any other action that you are doing within your organization. Having top performers. If you look at your organization and you look at however you want to segment them, A players, B players, and C players, right? And a lot of people worry about the C players and, are trying to get A players. But if you can even move 10% of your B players to A players, if you quantify that out into the value that's going to bring in the revenue, it is huge. It is massive. Right. But it takes that intentional thought around it to just take that step back and think through the math of it of, a lot of people are, hey, can I get a C player to an A player? It's like, start small. Look at someone that's consistently hitting in that 75 to 80% maybe of their quota. How do you get them to 95 to 100, right? Or 90 to 95? Because that 10% bump, the impact of that is going to be tremendous to your organization. So I think that's one of the things that we've learned during this scaling is that as you're bringing all these people on, in growing out the teams, being really intentional about what does success look like and what does sustainable success look like. And sustainable success is taking those incremental growth of people that are doing well, that are the right fit, and elevating them. That's what you're going to see the most impact to your bottom line. I think that's something that got overlooked that we've really learned in the last sort of 5-7 years that we're even more focused on moving forward.
I really like that intentional part of what you've described, because a lot of initiatives that we get involved, for example, are because there is an issue, because there's a problem. Now let's solve that quickly. There's no intentionality with it. It's quick sort of firefighting versus having a strategic approach to get these, B2A and C2B players like you have described. You mentioned my last question for the day that I always finish off, and you have teed it up so nicely for me, probably the best tee up in all my podcasts so far, is you've mentioned the skill set that people require to be successful. Now, my last question always is, share with us, in your opinion, what are the top 3 things that excellent salespeople in terms of skills and behaviors need to possess, need to execute effectively, or can acquire, to be fair, as we talk about this, to be top level excellent salespeople? What would those top 3 are, in your opinion?
So I think number one, which we've talked about around the lifelong learner, I'm going to sort of say combined with curiosity. So we can bucket that under curiosity. I don't know any top level salespeople, successful salespeople that aren't just genuinely curious when they're working with their customers, right? They're going in there customer centric, really interested in learning what's going on in that business. What are the challenges? And then eventually getting to, okay, now is there a way that we can help you? It starts with the customer and that curiosity around it. So I think the number one skill set for me is around that curiosity. Number two is the interpersonal skills and understanding how to utilize your resources. I think that selling more than ever as well is more and more a team game, especially, here at Salesforce, as we've scaled up the resources that a salesperson has available to them. Just a quick example, when we celebrate at the end of the year and you celebrate, the successes of the year, we bring people up on stage at, sales kickoffs, things like that. There's one example that just stuck out to me a few years ago. They bring up, 5 top deals, and they bring up the people that close those deals to celebrate them. And the first deal is sort of the smallest one, and then they get to the largest one at the end. Right. The first deal, it's usually the AE, maybe an SE, and their manager. And then by the time you get to the really big deal, there are like 50 people on stage. You got customer success managers, you got multiple sales leaders, you got executives in there, right? So it's like you can be successful as a lone wolf or staying within a certain lane, but to really have that impact on your customers and fulfill vision, it's utilizing that resource and bringing people in to help you sell, I think is just such an impactful skill for individuals to have.
Difficult to come by and difficult to find in sales
100%, right? But it's a differentiator when you can find people that
I agree
can relinquish some of the role of selling to bring in partners, to bring in other resources. It's a game changer. And then I would say number 3, there is just an internal motor that is required in sales. And this won't come to a surprise probably to any of your listeners, but that ability to just grind and overcome adversity and overcome objections and just keep going, right, is something that we look for because it's so important. Sales is just such a difficult job to begin with. It's filled with rejection. A 30% close rate, let's say, is a great close rate on deals. That means 70% of the time you're failing, right? And that's okay. Like that is part of it. It's similar to baseball stats, right? I'm a big baseball fan. And it's like, if you're batting 300 as a baseball player, you're probably an all-star. But that means 7 out of 10 times you're not getting a hit. And sales isn't much different than that, right? That there is a lot of failure in it. And you have to be okay with that. And you have to learn from it. And you have to bounce back and figure out what the next step looks like. And I think that that's, again, an innate trait that people have that you can vet out and that you need to understand their level of tolerance around that as they come into these types of roles.
I love it. So to sum it up, it's curiosity, being customer-centric and focused on understanding customers' business issues and wanting to solve them, the interpersonal skills of aligning team resources to win bigger deals,
Love it.
and the intellectual sort of piece to grind, keep going, never give up, and always progress. Thank you, Mark. You have been a fabulous addition to our podcast. I know our listeners will very, very much appreciate your insights and thought leadership. Thank you for taking the time.
I appreciate you having me. A big fan of the podcast, so pleasure to be on here. Thank you so much for having me.
Fabulous. Well, community of listeners, my dear people, one call to action: like this, comment on it, share it with people who you think this is applicable and would benefit from the great insights that Mark has shared with us. Also, go to globalperformancegroup.com and sign up for our global sales portal with all the different podcasts, webinars, and so forth that you can consume for free. Until the next time, my lovely people, look after yourselves and happy selling to everyone. Bye-bye.